She was a powerful CEO and offered a fortune for a masseur's time, and discovered something she never expected. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. It was 2 in the afternoon when the black Mercedes turned onto a quiet side street in Tribeca, one of the few corners in Manhattan where historic charm met discreet luxury. Sunlight poured between the buildings, casting soft reflections on the pavement, but inside the car, the atmosphere was tense. Vivian Hale, CEO of the Hale and Stratton Group, kept her sunglasses on and her jaw clenched. Her phone vibrated non-stop in her lap, a new notification popping up every 2 minutes. Meetings, requests, demands. She ignored all of them. The driver waited in silence, hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Vivian pressed her fingers against her temple and said, without raising her voice, "Take me somewhere no one recognizes me. Anywhere. Or I swear I'm going to lose it in this next meeting." Her assistant in the passenger seat hesitated, then offered, "There's an old spa in the East Village. Nothing fancy, but very low profile. No cameras, no social media tags. No one." Trying to take pictures, she gave a single nod. The car moved without another word. 30 minutes later, it pulled up in front of a modest facade with a faded wooden sign. Eastern Bloom, Traditional Therapies. No glass displays, no neon signs. Nothing about the place said luxury, which that day was exactly what she needed. Inside, the faint scent of lavender replaced the heavy perfumes that usually lingered in corporate spaces. There was no background music, no receptionists rehearsing fake smiles, just a calm-looking woman with her hair tied in a neat bun and a composed smile. "Good afternoon. Full body massage or targeted?" Vivian removed her sunglasses with a practiced motion. "Full, and I want your best person." It sounded more like a command than a request. "We have someone available now. He's our most requested therapist." Vivian simply made a small gesture with her hand, signaling that she was ready. The woman pointed down a hallway. The room was modest, warm, dimly lit, and minimally decorated. Vivian removed her coat, kicked off her heels, and loosened the top buttons of her silk blouse. She lay face down on the massage table, resting her head on the folded towel, and waited. When the door opened, she heard only, "Good afternoon, I'm Eli. If you're ready, we can begin." The voice was calm and direct, no attempt to charm her. Vivian didn't reply. She just made a slight motion with her fingers, granting him permission to start. Eli washed his hands in the small sink beside the table and stepped closer. His touch was clinical, assured, without hesitation. Not a single wasted movement. He applied pressure exactly where it was needed, his fingers moving with precision, as if he understood what lay beneath the skin. Fatigue, tension, anger. Vivian was used to being touched with intent. Eyes that searched for permission. Hands that wanted something in return. Eli didn't. He treated her body as just that. A body, not a powerful woman, not a symbol, just muscle, skin, and breath. When he reached her calves, a chill ran down her spine. Not from pain, from surprise. It was the rare sensation of being touched by someone who expected absolutely nothing. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked, voice muffled by the towel. "Long enough to know when a body needs silence." His reply held no irony, no flirtation, just truth. She allowed herself the faintest of smiles. "And mine? Does it need silence?" "It's screaming." She let out a quiet, nasal laugh. "Do you always talk to clients like this?" "Only when they ask questions." Vivian thought about continuing the conversation, but decided against it. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Eli didn't try to make small talk, didn't compliment her, didn't pretend to be likable. He simply did his job and did it well. When the session ended, he said only, "Take your time getting dressed," and left the room. She remained on the table for a few moments, her body slower to move, like it was recalibrating itself. At the front desk, she paid, without asking anything. But before leaving, she turned and asked the woman, "That Eli, is he married?" The woman looked mildly surprised. "No, not that we know of. And from what we hear, he's never been with anyone." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "With hands like that?" "Yes, he's had offers. Rumor is he's never accepted any of them. He's extremely private. Some believe he's never been in a relationship." The word wasn't spoken, but it hung in the air. Virgin. Vivian said nothing. She walked out, the sound of her heels echoing on the wooden floor, got in the car, crossed her legs, and leaned her head against the window. She thought about the word, the idea, his face, and more than anything, the way he had completely ignored her. On the drive back, she didn't open her laptop, didn't take any calls. For the first time in a very long time, a name took up more space in her mind than any multi-million-dollar deal. Eli. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't obvious attraction. It wasn't the thrill of conquest. It was something else. A mix of curiosity and challenge, an impulse she wasn't used to feeling. And maybe that's why, the very next morning at exactly 7:50 a.m., her Mercedes was already parked in front of the same understated building. She walked in without ceremony and spoke before the receptionist could say anything. "I want the same as yesterday, same therapist, no substitutes." The woman hesitated, surprised by the sharpness of the request, but pointed toward the hallway. Vivian walked down with steady steps, but something in her eyes had changed, something between anticipation and unease. Eli was already preparing the oils when she entered. "Good morning," he said, not even looking up. "Vivian," she replied, as she laid down. "Let's skip the formalities today." He didn't respond, just washed his hands and began. She closed her eyes, waited, then broke the silence. "I thought about you all night," he replied without losing focus. "I hope it didn't ruin your sleep." "It didn't, but I lost my appetite." Silence. He continued his movements, firm and deliberate. "You're different, Eli. Distant, like you're not trying to impress anyone. It's not my job to impress, it's to help." She turned her face slightly. "And what if someone wants more than help?" Eli paused for a moment, then resumed with the same precision. "I have boundaries, even when the person is compelling." She didn't say another word, but by then it wasn't just interest anymore, it was obsession. That morning dragged on endlessly for Vivian. Meetings, reports, phone calls with lawyers. Everything felt blurred. She was physically present in every room, every video call, every negotiation table. But inside, her thoughts revolved around something no one in those spaces could have imagined: a massage therapist. More precisely, a man who had dared to remain unmoved by her presence, who hadn't tried to lean in, flatter, or smile deferentially. A man who seemed completely unaffected by the image she had spent a decade crafting. After the session, Vivian had returned to her car, crossed half the city, signed high-stakes documents, but the only thing that still lingered was the way he had touched her, with distance, with precision, and strangely, with respect. And that was entirely new. The kind of thing money couldn't buy, not with a performance bonus, not with a designer watch. That night, she sat alone at the dinner table. She couldn't eat. She pushed the plate away, poured herself a glass of wine, and stared at her reflection in the dark red surface. She felt challenged in a way that had nothing to do with business. Tisha. Next morning, she returned to the spa. Third day in a row. She didn't bother to put on eye makeup like she usually did. The receptionist recognized her immediately, and before Vivian could speak, said cautiously, "He's with another client right now. It'll be a while." Vivian removed her sunglasses, took a seat in the waiting chair, and simply replied, "I'll wait." And she did. For more than 30 minutes, sitting in silence, observing the plain walls, the receptionist's movements, and the constant scent of lavender in the air. When Eli finally emerged into the hallway, she stood at once. He looked surprised to see her, but showed no discomfort. Just said, "Good morning. I'm not here for a massage today." "Okay." She stepped forward. "I want to have dinner with you." The words hung in the air for a few seconds. There was no flirtation in her tone, no suggestion, just a woman used to making decisions. But Eli's answer was calm, direct. "No." Vivian's brow furrowed. "You're turning me down?" "I'm saying I'm not interested." She took another step, gaze steady, almost daring. "Everyone has a price, Eli." He met her stare. "I'm not for sale." Vivian left the spa with hard steps, but her face gave nothing away. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't flinch. She got into the car with her usual composure, but something inside her had shifted. She tried to get back into her routine, but her usual emotional detachment had been disturbed. That afternoon, during a presentation with investors, she lost focus in the middle of her pitch. One of the partners had to step in and finish with numbers she knew by heart, but couldn't articulate. She left the office earlier than usual, went straight home. On the drive, the same image kept looping in her mind. Eli's calm eyes, the way he refused her invitation, the strange sense that he had seen right through her. Not as a CEO, not as a woman, as a person, and that rattled her more than any professional setback ever could. The following morning, still unsettled, Vivian gave her personal assistant instructions. "I want everything on Eli. Full name, address, work history, contacts, anything you can find." Rachel, who had been with her for 7 years, paused before responding. "For what purpose, Mom?" "You don't need to understand, just get it done." 2 hours later, a printed report landed on Vivian's desk. Just 3 pages, no social media accounts, no academic records. He'd been working at the same spa for 2 years, lived alone in a small walk-up apartment in the East Village, never married, no criminal record, no children, no debts, no known relatives. "It's like he didn't exist before this," Rachel said. "Either someone erased his past, or he did it himself." Vivian flipped through the pages, frustration rising. The lack of information said more than any resume. Ordinary people didn't just disappear from public records. At this point, she no longer wanted to know just who he was. She needed to understand why he was affecting her like this. Later that afternoon, without telling anyone, she drove herself to the address. Listed in the report, an old building, plain facade, no doorman, no elevator. A tenant was leaving just as she arrived, and she slipped inside. She climbed the stairs slowly, noticing details along the way: metal mailboxes, chipped paint on the second-floor walls, the smell of cigarettes wafting from a half-open apartment door. At Unit 304, she knocked 3 times. Nothing. Knocked again. Still no sound. She turned the handle. It was unlocked. She pushed the door open gently. What she saw made her body freeze. The apartment was empty. Completely. No furniture, no boxes, no signs of life. It looked as though no one had ever lived there, just the echo of her own steps and the faint sound of traffic outside. She sat on the cold floor and stayed there for several minutes. Then she got up, left the building, and drove home slowly. When she arrived, she found an envelope at her door. No return address, just her name handwritten on the front. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, no signature. Just one sentence, centered on the page. "When you trust the silence, I'll return." Vivian stood there, staring at the words. For a moment, she wanted to crumple the paper and throw it away, but something stopped her. She traced her fingers across the page, feeling the grooves of the ink. The handwriting was firm, precise. She didn't know for sure if it was from him, but she wanted to believe it was. She wanted to believe it more than she was willing to admit. Trust the silence. That's what he wrote. Don't chase, don't track, don't demand, just trust. She had no control, no answers, and couldn't. By her way to understanding, only emptiness, and the silence that once felt comfortable now echoed like a roar. Vivian Hale's mornings usually began with a flood of notifications, black coffee with no sugar, and a dozen decisions made before 9 a.m. But that Monday, nothing followed the usual rhythm. She arrived at the office an hour earlier than usual, but didn't touch the reports, didn't reply to emails. She stood in front of the tall glass window in her corner office, watching the traffic along 6th Avenue, as if expecting someone to emerge from between the cars. The note was still in her handbag, folded neatly, like an unsolved riddle. Trust the silence. She tried, but the silence had grown heavy. And the more time passed, the more she felt on the edge of something she couldn't name. That same afternoon, during a meeting with the finance committee, one of the directors made a casual remark. Looks like your name's trending. Someone filmed you leaving a spa recently. Just a few seconds, but it went viral. Vivian didn't react. She simply closed the folder in front of her and stood up. Meeting adjourned. We'll deal with this later. In the elevator, her heart raced and sweat began to collect at her temples. She unlocked her phone and typed the name of the spa. It didn't take long to find. The video was there. Poorly filmed, shaky, but unmistakable. It showed the door being pushed open forcefully, her walking out with a tense expression, heels striking the floor hard, face marked by fury. The caption was biting, "When the billionaire gets turned down by the massage guy." The comments cascaded beneath it, jokes, speculations, curiosity. Who's this guy who rejected the CEO of Hale and Stratton? Finally, someone with backbone. She really thought everything had a price. Her blood boiled, her hands trembled, not because of the content itself, but because someone had seen, recorded, and shared it. She tried to activate the company's legal team to get the video removed. The response came quickly and offered nothing. It was posted by a customer. Public setting. Legally, there's no grounds. The more we try to erase it, the more attention it gets. For the first time, Vivian was being discussed publicly for reasons she couldn't control. The next morning, she arrived at the spa before it even opened, sat in her car, sunglasses on, hands trembling in her lap. As soon as the receptionist came to unlock the front door, Vivian stepped out and entered with determined steps. "I need to speak to Eli. Now." The receptionist's eyes widened. "He's not here. Didn't leave a return time." Vivian took a deep breath, holding back her frustration. "Then call him. Tell him it's urgent." The woman hesitated. "I'm not authorized to do that." Vivian pulled $500 from her bag and placed the bills on the counter. "Does this help with authorization?" The woman swallowed hard, picked up the landline, dialed a number, and waited. "He's not answering." "Call again." She tried. Nothing. Vivian turned sharply and paced in circles across the reception area. She was unraveling. "I'm not leaving until I speak to him." The receptionist, now visibly anxious, called the spa owner. Minutes later, she hung up and looked at Vivian nervously. "He asked that you not remain here, ma'am. It's disrupting the space, please." Vivian left without a word, but before getting into the car, she made a decision. That night, she hired a private investigator, one of the best in New York. She handed over the few details she had and paid up front. "I want everything on this man. Connections, history, associates, any ties to businesses or families. He may look like just a massage therapist, but no one disappears that well without help." 2 days later, a black envelope landed on her desk. Inside, the report was brief, but one photo stood out. Eli, younger, dressed in a formal suit at a gala event, standing next to an older man. The setting looked like a corporate conference venue. On the back of the photograph, a faded handwritten note, JL, Event NYC 2019. Vivian stared at Eli's face. His smile was broader then, his eyes brighter. There was something in that photo that didn't match the reserved man she'd met at the spa. And the man beside him, stern, powerful, was familiar. Unsettlingly familiar. She spent hours connecting names, faces, dates. And then it clicked. The man was Richard Zhang, head of one of the most discreet investment networks on the East Coast. According to profiles she'd read years earlier, he had only one son, a sole heir who had disappeared in 2020. The birth name was different. Jinhai Zhang, Chinese-American, degrees in international finance and economics, training in Hong Kong, time spent in Brussels, no social media presence, no recent photos, just the mystery of a vanished heir. News outlets had claimed that after the sudden death of his younger brother, he had cut ties with his family and abandoned everything. Theories ranged from mental health crises to a deliberate escape driven by conflict within the family empire. Vivian exhaled sharply, letting the report fall onto the desk. It all made sense. The way he spoke, the knowing look in his eyes, the mastery over silence. Eli was a chosen name, a cover, and now she understood that the man who had unraveled her with a single refusal wasn't just a massage therapist. He was an heir who had either walked away from a fortune or run from it. And suddenly, the mystery wasn't just personal, it was dangerous. That night, Vivian didn't reach out to anyone. She sat alone in her living room, holding the old photo in her hand, with one question repeating in her mind. Why would a man like that disappear? And why choose her as the one to reject? Was it just coincidence? Or something more? In the middle of the night, without knowing what pushed her, she opened the Notes app on her phone and typed, "I want to talk, not about money, about you." But she had nowhere to send it. No number, no bridge. Eli had left a message, and she had promised, without fully understanding, that she would wait, that she would trust. But waiting meant doing nothing, and Vivian Hale was not made for stillness. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual, dressed like she did on the days that mattered, gathered her evidence, her frustration, her resolve, and headed to a restaurant she never visited, but was listed in the report. It was routine. She knew she'd find someone there who could fill in the blanks. She knew the bond between Eli and Richard Zhang was real, and with or without permission, she was ready to discover why anyone would choose to walk away from everything. The restaurant's facade was understated, tucked between two modern art galleries in Tribeca, one of those rare pockets of Manhattan where influence and privacy coexisted without drawing attention. Vivian didn't call ahead, didn't make a reservation. She simply walked in, like someone who already knew exactly who she was there to meet. The maitre d' recognized her immediately. Before she could say a word, he gave a slight nod and gestured toward a table in the back. "Mr. Zhang always arrives at 10:30. He's on his way." She gave a single nod in return and followed the direction without hesitation. She sat down, ordered a coffee, and glanced at the surrounding artwork, contemporary pieces, minimalist brushstrokes, and a few bold red streaks across muted canvases. When Richard Zhang entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. He was of average height, with white hair cut precisely, but not a trace of frailty. His eyes were sharp, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored, his stride composed and assured. When he saw her, he didn't flinch. He simply approached the table and asked calmly, "You came alone?" "I don't usually bring third parties to important conversations," she replied. He sat down, ordered green tea, and for a long moment, silence lingered between them, like a third presence at the table. "You know who I am. I know who you are." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Vivian said, crossing her legs and locking eyes with him. "I'm here to talk about your son." Richard placed his hands on the table. His expression didn't change, not a flicker of reaction. "Which one?" "The one who's alive. The one working as a massage therapist in this city under the name Eli." For the briefest second, his gaze faltered, almost imperceptibly, but Vivian saw it. "You found him?" "I looked for him," she corrected, "but our first meeting was a coincidence." Richard leaned back and exhaled slowly. "So he decided to show up. It was about time." "He didn't come back to you," Vivian said, pulse quickening. "I don't think he's looking for reconciliation." His father nodded, more to himself than to her. Jinhai's always been that way. When he walks away, he leaves nothing behind. If he's allowed contact, even indirect, it means something's changed. He never told me who he was. Of course he didn't. He never does. Richard folded his napkin carefully, not looking at her. Then he spoke again. "After my younger son died, Jinhai went quiet. No yelling, no crying, no blame. He just disappeared. One day he was home, the next he was gone. Closed accounts, sold whatever he held personally, left everything behind. I hired investigators, called in favors. It didn't matter. He built his own disappearance. In all these years, I've only received one note. It said, 'Don't look for me, don't rescue me, don't try to understand.'" He finally looked up. "You're chasing answers, but trust me, Ms. Hale, some questions do more damage when answered. I'm not looking to save him. I just want to understand why he crossed my path." Richard smiled for the first time, a tight, knowing smile. "Maybe because you need exactly that. A path you don't control." Vivian leaned in slightly. "I'm not here for riddles. I want to know if he's in danger, or if he's putting others at risk." Richard shook his head. "He's not dangerous, but he can be devastating if he chooses to be. And if he's near you, it means he's chosen not to disappear again. At least not yet." Vivian stayed silent for a long moment. Then she sipped her now cold coffee. "Do you want me to push him away?" "Me?" Richard arched a brow. "I want him to live, however he chooses, and if that includes you, then I hope you're ready." "Ready for what?" "For the things he doesn't say, for the disappearances, for the fact that he always leaves." The waiter came to clear their cups. Richard stood without hurry. "Don't try to save him, Ms. Hale. He's not someone who needs saving. Just someone who needs to be seen, and even that, sometimes, he'll reject." She watched him walk out the door. Then she remained seated, motionless, his words still vibrating in the space he'd left behind. What she felt wasn't fear or anger. It was something more complex, recognition, as if in that moment she'd come face to face with someone who mirrored the part of herself she had kept hidden for years. She stepped out of the restaurant, crossed the street on foot, and kept walking without any clear direction. The October breeze had a new chill in it. For the first time in ages, Vivian felt no urge to control a single thing. That night, she barely slept. She turned the lights on in her living room, played some soft instrumental music, and reread the report again. The name, the image, the condensed profile. She tried to make sense of why this man had affected her so deeply. There was no traditional seduction between them, no promises, no games, just that unsettling calm, that unreadable look, and the refusal, always the refusal. That was what cut, what challenged, what made her want to keep digging, even when everything inside her screamed to stop. At 3 a.m., she opened her laptop, logged into a private forum reserved for senior executives. She typed only, "Does anyone know Richard Zhang or his son?" She didn't think twice. She knew it was risky, but she didn't care anymore. She needed leads. An hour later, a reply appeared, anonymous but direct. His son vanished after the Geneva incident. Don't trust him too easily, and don't underestimate him. Vivian reread the message 3 times, then started researching everything she could find about Geneva, scandals, backchannels, buried articles. What surfaced was murky, but unsettling. Financial maneuvers, disappearances, and one name repeated throughout, Jinhai Zhang. With daylight starting to bleed through the city, Vivian stepped out onto her balcony. New York was quiet, cold, barely awake. She sipped freshly brewed coffee and thought about how much had changed in such a short time. She had never gotten involved with anyone she couldn't read, never let anyone cross the line between curiosity and desire without paying a price. And now someone had done that to her, without asking, without warning. The entire city could sleep, but she couldn't anymore. She knew she had entered territory she didn't control, and paradoxically, that was the very thing keeping her wide awake. Vivian spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet restlessness. Her conversation with Richard Zhang had left more than questions hanging in the air. There was a subtle, unshakable sense that something foundational in her life had been moved, out of place. She went home feeling unanchored, shuffled through old notes, letters, documents, everything she had quietly collected over the last few weeks. What once felt disjointed now formed a loose but undeniable thread. She no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. The truth was surfacing piece by piece. In one of the hotel's old dossiers, she found an overlooked medical file and a reference to a clinic in an outlying neighborhood. The name had once seemed irrelevant. Now, it felt like a destination. She wasn't going to wait for answers. She would go find them. The building wasn't flashy, but it was well kept. Clean exterior, wide windows, a tree-lined entryway. The reception area was minimal, and when Vivian spoke the name, Eli, the woman at the front desk hesitated for just a second. Barely noticeable, but she caught it. The receptionist asked her to wait. Minutes later, Vivian was led upstairs to a private room. Eli stood with his back to the door, rearranging bottles on a pale wooden shelf. When he heard it open, he turned slowly. Their eyes met without surprise. Neither spoke at first. Vivian stepped forward. "I think you knew I'd come." He placed one hand on the massage table behind him. "You know now. Not everything." He didn't answer, walked toward the window and stood there, profile to her. "You talked to my father." "I did, and now I want to hear from you." Eli exhaled slowly. "What do you want to know?" "Whether you were running from something or just refusing the role they forced on you." He turned and walked to the other side of the room. "I wasn't running. I chose not to continue. They had a script ready, a set path. But I wasn't interested in control or prestige. I wanted the right to exist beyond their expectations." His voice wasn't defensive, just even and contained. "My father never understood that. Thought it was rebellion, pride, some tantrum. It wasn't. I just needed distance to keep being myself." Vivian watched every move he made, her eyes scanning him with new intent. "You chose anonymity," he nodded. "I chose anonymity, and for a long time, it saved me. Until I showed up." A faint smile touched his lips. "You didn't just show up. You crashed through, out of nowhere, and I let it happen." "Why?" It took him a few seconds to respond. "Because something about you felt real, different, and I haven't had much of that around me lately." She stepped closer but left enough space between them. "You let me in, knowing that if I found the truth, it would all come back to you." "Yes. Weren't you afraid?" "I was. I still am. But not for the reasons you think. I'm afraid of being pulled back into all of that, of being forced to use a name that doesn't represent me. So why didn't you stop me from digging?" Eli met her gaze without wavering. "Because what you brought wasn't a threat. It was curiosity. A presence I didn't expect. But that stirred something, even when your arrogance pushed at every wall I had." Vivian didn't look away. You were interested too. Tell me, are you still hiding? No, I just don't broadcast it. And now? Now I'm here, standing in front of you. No mask. The words didn't sound like a defense or even a confession. They felt like a quiet offering, something only made possible because she'd come too far to be ignored. The room felt suspended in time. A delicate tension hung between them. Not confrontation, something softer, like expectation without urgency. Vivian paused before speaking again. Are you going to stay here? Eli nodded. For now. Then can I come see you again? You already found me. She took a step back, almost ready to leave, but before her hand touched the door handle, she turned again. Do you cook? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He raised an eyebrow. Terribly. That's okay. I can bring something. Is this a dinner invitation? Maybe. He walked over and opened the door for her. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. She gave a slight nod and smiled to herself as she descended the stairs. Outside, the sky had already darkened. Streetlights shimmered on the damp sidewalks, and the city felt quieter than usual. Vivian walked at an easy pace, her bag slung over her shoulder, thoughts finally aligned. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, whether the dinner would lead to something more or remain a quiet gesture between two strangers who recognized each other in unexpected ways. But Eli no longer felt like an enigma. He was real. He was human. And even without knowing how things would end, she knew exactly where she'd be in the hours to come, in front of him. No questions, no defenses, just there. Vivian arrived at the clinic right on time, carrying a small insulated bag and a plain paper package from a bakery. She hadn't come to impress him, nor did she know exactly what to expect. It was simply a response to the impulse to keep the connection alive, to not let silence take over after everything that had been said. Eli was waiting for her in the reception area, no lab coat this time, just a light linen shirt and dark slacks. He looked like a different man in that space. Less clinical, more open. He led her to a small room in the back, seemingly used as a break room between appointments. There was a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a small sink in the corner. No decoration, no sign of daily domestic life. Still, Vivian unpacked the containers calmly, setting everything out on the table as if she'd done it many times before. I brought quiche and salad, she said, handing him a cloth napkin. It's what I could throw together with whatever I had in the fridge. He pulled out the chair with a quiet motion and sat down. Sounds great, was all he said. The meal began with small silences between thoughts. Vivian told him about the previous day, how she'd followed the lead that brought her to the clinic. Eli listened without interrupting, chewing slowly at times, as if each detail required space to settle. She didn't try to fill the quiet with unnecessary chatter. There was comfort in the pauses and a kind of mutual respect in the words left, unspoken between one question and the next. When he finally spoke, it was with deliberate clarity. You never asked why I go by Eli. She looked up. Didn't feel like something I had the right to question. He leaned back in his chair. It's a name I picked, a nickname from high school. Started using it during my travels. It stuck. Have you left often? More than I'd like to admit. Always coming back to New York? Almost never. Her eyes lingered on him longer than she intended. The evening unfolded slowly. There was no clock in the room, but neither of them seemed to care. When the food was gone, she packed up the containers methodically. Eli stood, offered her a cup of tea, and stepped out to fill an old electric kettle with water. When he returned, she was standing near the wall, gazing out the room's only window. You always seem so in control, he said, his voice lower. Now, as he sorted through the tea bags, Vivian glanced at him. I've always had to be, she replied. But really, it's just exhaustion. He looked at her for a moment. "I know that feeling. And you? You always seem a little distant." Eli handed her the cup carefully. When their fingers touched, the gesture was brief, but his eyes held hers for a second longer than expected. "I don't always know how to be close." Vivian brought the cup to her lips. "Did you think Richard would come speak to me?" "I wasn't sure. But he's not the type to give up easily." "Does he want you back?" "He wants to keep what he's always had, even when it doesn't make sense anymore." There was no bitterness in his tone. It was a simple fact. Vivian thought of how often she'd heard similar stories, families clinging to broken structures out of tradition and legacy. "Do you miss any of it?" she asked. Eli took his time before answering. "I miss thinking about the future without fearing I'll be dragged backward." She made a small gesture, signaling her understanding. There was something about him that went deeper than mere choice. It was survival. It was clear now that walking away had cost him more than just a name. "Have you ever thought about leaving New York?" she asked quietly. "I have," he replied, still looking down at his tea. "But something about this city holds me." Vivian waited, giving him space. "There are still corners here where no one knows who I am, where the name doesn't carry weight, where I can walk down a street without dragging the past behind me." She turned slightly, trying to catch his gaze. "And me? When you look at me, what do you see?" Eli looked up. Strangely, someone who doesn't care about last names. There was a short pause. "And someone who saw me even when I was trying to disappear." The tea had gone cold. Their conversation had moved far beyond a casual dinner. When she finally checked her phone, it was past 10. "I should go," she said, though there was no rush in her tone. Eli walked her to the clinic's front door. Neither of them said anything dramatic or definitive. They simply looked at each other for a few moments, and Vivian touched his arm lightly before stepping outside. On the drive home, she didn't turn on the radio, didn't check her messages. She let the city pass by outside the car windows, everything feeling slightly suspended. There was no more doubt about the connection. It didn't need a label or a plan. Whatever had formed between them tonight was real, and it was nothing like what she'd imagined the day they met. Vivian woke the next morning to soft daylight peeking through the curtains of her apartment. For a brief second, she wondered if she'd dreamed it all. The dinner, the tea, the quiet exchange between two people from worlds that rarely collide. But the containers on the kitchen counter and the folded bag on the chair were proof it had all happened. She replayed the evening in her mind, every sentence, every pause, every glance. Something was shifting. She couldn't name it yet, but the sensation lingered. On her way to work, she avoided checking her phone. She didn't want to be pulled into the usual notifications, messages, or demands. She wanted that feeling to last just a little longer. At the office, she threw herself into deadlines with unusual focus. But by mid-afternoon, while reviewing a draft article, a call came through from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. It was Richard. His voice, usually so composed, sounded unusually light. He said only that he'd like to meet. No agenda, and suggested a quiet cafe at the end of the day. She arrived at the cafe on time. Richard was already seated at a back table with 2 coffees waiting. No folders, no documents. It was, as promised, informal. "You spoke to Eli," he said, getting straight to the point. She nodded. "And did he speak to you?" "A little." "That's already a lot." Vivian rested her arms on the table. "Do you still expect him to come back?" Richard looked away briefly, as if searching for the answer elsewhere. "Not in the way we once hoped, but yes, I still hope he'll see us as family again. And do you think I have anything to do with that? I don't know what you mean to him, but I have a sense of what he might mean to you." The comment caught her off guard for a moment. "And what do you think he means?" "A break. And maybe a beginning." The server passed by to clear their cups. Richard asked for 2 more, like time wasn't a concern. Vivian took a slow breath. You let him go, but now you press him with guilt. Maybe. What if he doesn't want any contact at all? Richard leaned in slightly, not with arrogance, but with quiet insistence. He never will, but maybe he needs it. Vivian leaned back. That's not my responsibility. It is if you're the reason he starts reconsidering everything. The conversation had drifted beyond family. It felt like a warning, or maybe a quiet acknowledgement that she now belonged to a circle that had once been far from her world. I'm not a condition for anything, she said calmly. Richard smiled barely, which might be exactly what he needed, someone who doesn't ask him to be anything but himself. She finished her coffee without another word. There was nothing more to debate. They both seemed to understand the weight of the moment without further explanation. Back at home, Vivian dropped her bag in the living room and went straight to the shower. The hot water helped release what tension remained. Afterward, she threw on something soft, clipped her hair up loosely, and picked up her phone. There it was, a message from Eli, sent about 40 minutes earlier. If you're still up later, let me know. She didn't reply right away. She sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and let the moment settle. Then she typed, I'm up. The call came a few minutes later. Hey. Hi. His voice was different, lower, slower, more relaxed. They had talked about her day, his clients, the clinic. He mentioned the elevator acting up again, and she told him the door in her building sometimes stuck when it got windy. They laughed, lightly, without pressure, and when silence came, it didn't feel strange. Did my father talk to you? He asked, like he already knew. Yes. Did he still speak about me like I owe him something? He talked about you like someone he's afraid to lose. Eli took a moment before responding. And you? Do you think I should go back? I think you have the right to choose what you want. But running isn't the same as choosing. He let out a soft sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. You talk like you actually know me, maybe because I do, more than you think. It was almost midnight when they hung up. Vivian lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wide awake. Something between them was evolving, even if neither could name it. The next day, there was no morning message, no invitation. She followed her routine, though everything felt slightly off its usual rhythm. That afternoon, a small package arrived at the office, a box with her name written by hand. Inside, a single item, a leather bookmark, engraved with the letter V. No note, no signature, but she knew exactly who it was from. She smiled to herself, tucked the gift into her bag, and got back to work without mentioning it to anyone. Some connections don't need explanation, they only need continuity. In the days that followed the arrival of the bookmark, Vivian began to notice a subtle shift in how she experienced time. Mornings felt longer, tasks more mechanical, and the focus she once summoned effortlessly now required intention. There were no messages, no calls, no sign of Eli, yet the silence didn't feel final, only charged with something she hadn't yet named. She kept herself busy with the usual workload, restructured timelines, reevaluated goals, but the gesture he had made, so deliberate, so intimate, lingered in her routines. The leather bookmark with the engraved initial followed her from one report to the next, becoming more than just an object. It was memory and absence, layered into one. And just as Vivian tried to move forward, a new element surfaced. On Wednesday afternoon, Rachel entered her office holding a plain envelope delivered by a man the doorman described as polite, quiet, and of Asian descent. Vivian recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. Inside, there was a single line. If you truly want to understand, speak to Mr. Zhang. There was no signature, but the message was unmistakable. Richard Zhang, Eli's father, was not out of the picture. And while his past appearances had seemed circumstantial, Vivian was beginning to understand that his actions were always intentional. She didn't hesitate. She located the discreet restaurant where they'd met before, called, and requested a reservation under his name. Less than 2 hours later, she was welcomed by a staff member who led her to the same private room. Richard was already there, alone, calm, as though her arrival had been expected. A tea tray had been prepared. No words were exchanged until she said, "I got the note." He nodded once. And when she brought up his son's name, the tone in the room shifted. Richard didn't speak in riddles. He explained that Eli hadn't vanished. He was simply trying to preserve a fragile form of freedom. His decision to step away from the family years ago hadn't been treated as rebellion. It was labeled a weakness. The Zhang name carried expectations, and his absence had only been tolerated because he stayed invisible, as long as Eli lived. Quietly, avoiding formal ties, public appearances, or high-profile affiliations, he remained manageable. But things changed when he got involved with Vivian, not because of the relationship itself, but because of what it symbolized. Being seen alongside someone like her, a high-profile CEO, in a market of strategic interest, drew attention. It turned a private decision into a matter of public influence. Richard had known where Eli was for some time. He'd simply chosen to observe. But when Vivian crossed boundaries that no one before her had dared to approach, Richard was compelled to act. Their conversation lasted no more than 20 minutes. There were no threats, no requests, just information. Richard explained that certain names had re-emerged in confidential meetings, that people were beginning to question Eli's reappearance, and that, despite Eli's belief that he was still in control, pieces were already in motion. "You've become a variable they can't predict," he said, looking her straight in the eyes. Vivian didn't respond with fear, only with clarity. She understood that, within that power structure, their relationship had shifted the balance. Richard wasn't trying to stop her. He was issuing a warning. The dinner ended with a nod. No demands, no veiled advice, but the message had been delivered. She was now part of the equation, either as a problem or a solution, depending on how she moved next. Vivian didn't call anyone after leaving the restaurant. She walked to her car with steady steps and drove home without detour. Once inside, she opened the drawer where she had once tucked away documents about the Zhang family. She read through them again. The timelines, the mergers, the quiet mentions. In old business articles, none of the facts had changed, but now the meaning had. She saw how meticulously Eli had avoided exposure, how he never signed documents, declined public appearances, stayed away from decisions that would tie him to any formal power. It was all meant to protect a margin of invisibility. And now, without realizing it, she had disrupted that balance with persistence, with presence, with care. She wasn't just a CEO entangled with a private man. She was a woman who, unintentionally, had exposed a vulnerability, something unacceptable to those who lived by control. The following day, reports didn't flow as smoothly. Meetings required greater effort to stay focused. And when her phone rang with an international number, a sharp unease settled in her chest. It was a request for a meeting. A new Asian investment group wanted to explore a joint venture with Hale and Stratton Group. The numbers were striking, but some of the names mentioned linked directly to former affiliates of the Zhang Corporation. Vivian remained polite. She scheduled a video call 5 days out. But as she ended the call, the realization hit. The movement had begun, not because of a merger, but because of a connection that should have stayed private. Standing by the window, phone still in hand, she thought clearly. From now on, nothing would be neutral, and the love she once believed to be an intimate choice was now exposed, powerful enough to alter strategies, alliances, and futures. The hours following that call left no room for distraction. Even with her schedule packed with financial reviews and international board negotiations, Vivian felt as though a second reality had begun to run parallel to everything else. quieter, less visible, but growing harder to ignore. She spent the next few days avoiding any impulsive moves while observing every detail with heightened awareness. She confirmed with her security team that no one had been following her, reinforced the access protocols at her building, and asked her assistant to screen international calls more strictly. She gave no names, no explanations, simply framed it as a personal safety measure. Rachel knew her well enough not to ask questions. She recognized the tone Vivian used when a decision was final. What no one knew was that behind every precaution was the lingering thought of Eli, and the fact that he hadn't come back, he hadn't called, he hadn't sent a single message. On Saturday morning, Vivian opened her personal email inbox to find a single unread message. No subject, no body text, just an attachment. A grainy black and white image of a narrow alleyway in what looked like one of New York's older neighborhoods. On the left edge, a male silhouette. His face was partially hidden, but the build was unmistakable. She knew it was him. The sender's address was temporary, untraceable. Vivian didn't reply. She simply downloaded the image, printed it on plain paper, folded it, slipped it into her purse, and walked out without a destination. She wandered the city for over an hour before stopping at a cafe near the Hudson River. She ordered an espresso, sat in the corner, and stayed there, still, quiet, trying to understand what the image meant. Was it a warning? A reminder? A farewell? None of it was clear. But one thing began to crystallize. Eli was still out there, and someone wanted her to know, but only on their terms. Sunday came with a cold breeze and an empty calendar. Vivian tried to review some reports, but focus escaped her. The alleyway flashed in her mind again and again. Damien's voice, his calculated tone, the names mentioned during the call, all of it seemed like fragments of a larger puzzle that still had pieces missing. Around 5 in the afternoon, the intercom buzzed. The doorman said there was a delivery for her, but the messenger had already left. He'd only dropped off a small box, her name printed in block letters on the top. Inside was a single item, a braided leather bracelet, simple and masculine. The same kind Eli used to wear on his left wrist. She'd noticed it weeks earlier. There was no note, no message, just the bracelet, as if that alone was enough. And for her, it was. Something tangible. A trace of someone who had been fading into silence. The video conference with the Asian investors took place at the scheduled time. Vivian held her composure, but anyone who truly knew her would have sensed the unease. The executives were polite, professional. They spoke of mutual opportunities and at one point even mentioned the potential for a joint base in Singapore. One of them alluded to prior affiliations with Hong Kong-based family groups. The name Zhang wasn't said aloud, but it hung over the call like a veiled implication. Vivian listened carefully, withholding any immediate interest. She told them her board would need time to review the offer thoroughly. Once the meeting ended, she asked her legal team to run a background check on every name presented. The reports came back before the end of the day. One associate had previously been investigated for exerting cross-influence between private holdings and sovereign funds. Nothing had ever been proven, but the signal was clear. Someone was testing the waters, getting closer to her with intentions that reached beyond business. That night, alone in her apartment, Vivian stepped out onto the balcony with the bracelet in hand. She looked out over the city, trying to make sense of the sequence, the signs, the silence, the indirect reappearances. She didn't see herself as fragile. She had faced hostile shareholders, internal crises, corporate sabotage. But nothing had ever made her feel the way she did now, emotionally destabilized by the love of someone who couldn't stay, who couldn't be reached like others, who disappeared the moment everything felt within reach. And yet, what she felt now, with a conviction as physical as breath, was that there was reciprocity. Eli wasn't manipulating her, he wasn't playing games, he was trying to protect her in his own way, with no promises, no explanations, only traces. And maybe instead of pushing her away, that only pulled her closer. Because now, it wasn't just about love. It was about standing together against something that came from the outside, something that allowed no weakness. Her phone rang shortly after 11. A private number. Vivian answered without hesitation. A man's voice, quick and precise, spoke with a faint accent. He told her to avoid any contact with the press over the next few days, that there might be questions, speculation, attempts to involve her, and most importantly, she should keep any connection to the Zhang name off the record. It's not the past that needs protection, he said. It's the future that could be compromised. The call ended in under a minute, and as she set the phone down, Vivian understood she had crossed a threshold. Not out of recklessness, but because she was willing to carry this through to the end, even if, at that moment, she had no idea when she'd see Eli again. What she felt, though, wasn't loss. It was resolve. And sometimes that was enough to keep going. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't announce his return. He simply showed up like someone who no longer needed permission to come back. Vivian spotted him from the balcony, his face half covered by a scarf, his eyes fixed on the entrance to her building, his hands tucked in the pockets of a dark coat. She went down without thinking, crossing the lobby with steady steps and a racing heart. As the automatic doors opened, the chill in the air clashed with the warmth stirring inside her. Eli didn't move. He just waited until she was close enough to hear him. And then, with a steadier voice than he expected to find, he said, "I didn't plan this. I didn't expect to fall in love with you, especially not like this, in the middle of real life, with no map, no script." Vivian kept her eyes on his. Eli went on, "But I'm done hiding. I won't pretend what we have is smaller than everything around us. If it comes with consequences, I'll face them, with you if you still want that." Her expression softened, her shoulders eased. No words felt necessary. She stepped forward, touched his face with the palm of her hand, and the kiss happened without hesitation, as if both had known for days that this was what they needed, an anchor point in the middle of all the unknowns. The conversation came hours later on the couch, with the lights dimmed and 2 mugs of tea barely touched on the coffee table. Vivian told him what had happened while he was gone. The phone call with veiled threats, the attempt at manipulation through business proposals. Eli listened carefully, his fingers laced with hers, his breathing measured. When she finished, it was his turn. He told her he had gone to see his father, that he had entered the old office unannounced and found Charles sitting across a chessboard as if nothing had changed. He wasn't surprised, Eli said, not by me showing up, not by what I came to say. The conversation was brief but conclusive. Eli made it clear he would not return to the company. He wouldn't accept any titles, any authority. But he also wouldn't live as a ghost. He asked to walk his own path, promising not to damage the family name or stir up disputes. Charles listened in silence, then stood, walked to a shelf, and handed Eli a small wooden box. Inside was an old boarding pass with Eli's name handwritten and dated the day he vanished. "You told me when you left," his father said. "And now you've told me you're back. That's enough." There was no embrace, no promise of reconciliation, but there was understanding. And that was enough. Vivian listened with misty eyes, though no tears fell. She understood what it meant. It wasn't just Eli's return. It was the end of a quiet pursuit that had started to pull people into its orbit. Their relationship had become a pressure point, a threat to the equilibrium of those invested in the status quo. But now, with the truth laid bare, everything shifted. Vivian had decisions to make too. She told Eli about the international offers she'd received, generous promises, all traced back to the same network watching them. She'd declined. She chose to slow the Garde Group's expansion until she could distinguish real allies from opportunists. And while she was used to working under pressure, she admitted that being involved with him had placed her in a different category of risk. Not because he was dangerous, but because he made her too visible. Now, though, there was no question. They were safer together than trying to preserve a false sense of independence that no longer existed. The next morning, they left early without saying where they were going. Eli suggested a small town on the southern coast, quiet, anonymous, where time moved at a different pace. Vivian agreed and informed the board she was taking a short leave. They rented a modest home with a wooden porch and a narrow garden. The days there were simple but full. They bought fresh bread in the mornings, read quietly in the afternoons, walked along the beach in the evening. At night, they slept together. No vows, no future plans spelled out, just the comfort of presence. The leather bracelet was back, on his wrist. The page marker stayed in her book on the table. They didn't speak about what came next or what they'd left behind. They simply lived the pause, and in that pause, they learned their bond didn't require external proof. It existed because they both chose to be there, knowing exactly what that meant. There was no running, only choosing. By the last week of February, back in New York, Vivian was in full motion again. Her strategic absences had ended, and any rumors about her personal life had faded from the executive conversations at Garde Group. Her image as a leader was stronger than ever, because that's where she thrived, at the center of decisions, surrounded by data, listening to her team, reshaping paths with experience and instinct. She remained head of the expansion committee, rejected aggressive foreign buyouts, and launched a new development unit focused on local, family-based enterprises. Some shareholders had been skeptical at first, but the consistent growth in the following quarters spoke louder than words. The company's new phase reflected something happening inside her too: emotional stability, clarity of vision, and a presence that needed no performance. Those who needed to understand, understood. She wasn't hiding, and she wasn't backing down. Eli, too, found his center, but in a different way. He didn't return to the family name or the corporate architecture of the Zhang dynasty. He didn't rebrand or turn his routine into a statement. He just continued. He rented a small studio in the East Village, with big windows and morning light, and opened a massage practice. It wasn't glamorous, but his schedule stayed full. Some former clients found him again. Others came through word of mouth. He didn't put his full name on the door, no last name on business cards, just Eli, and that was enough. His days passed with ease. Mornings were for sessions, afternoons he cleaned the studio, read, walked to the market. At night, he returned, home to Vivian, who was usually already there, either with a question about his week or the table set for two. The city no longer felt like a place to escape. It was a place where their choices made sense now. One afternoon in March, while adjusting the slides for an upcoming conference on ethical corporate governance, Vivian received an email confirmation from the organizers. The schedule was attached, along with a list of names for side events. One entry caught her eye: a workshop on workplace wellness and stress regulation. And there it was. Eli, independent practitioner, session, massage, and corporate. Stress relief. She read his name with a soft smile and closed the laptop. When he arrived home, she told him, "I signed up weeks ago," he said when he saw his name on the screen. "I just didn't mention it. Thought it might seem too small." She shook her head, lightly touching his arm. "It's exactly the right size." And so they continued. No need to validate one another, just living lives that now overlapped in peace. That night, they had a light dinner, watched an old movie, and left the windows open to let in the hum of the living city, the life they had chosen, simple, happy, together. The end. Did you enjoy this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional, unforgettable stories like this one. See you next time.